Hello, it's April 21st, 2010. I'm Ronik Saluja and welcome to Fox News. On January 22nd, 2010, just 12 days after NBC announced it will be returning Jay Leno to host its Tonight Show, Conan O'Brien ended his reign with the network. However, Conan has now released a statement saying he will be returning to television with his own show Conan on TBS, but more on that later. And now, in a Fox News special presentation, we look at the recent volcanic eruptions of volcano Eyjafjallajökull in Iceland. We have with us today our chief economist Shahim Abid, who will be providing us with the socio-economic impacts of this disaster. Furthermore, we have two field reporters on site in Iceland who will be exploring the science behind this volcano, as well as discussing how locals are coping with this disaster. However, now the real question becomes, how does a volcano in such remote northern regions of Europe affect millions of people around the globe and cost an industry over $1.7 billion? To truly understand this, we must explore the anatomy of the volcano as well as examine the events that led up to this catastrophic event. So now, let's take a look. Eyjafjallajökull, Icelandic for Glacier of Island Mountains, is an elongated, ice-covered stratovolcano or composite volcano located in southern Iceland, about 125 kilometers away from the nearest city, Hafnarfjörður. It is an active volcano that has erupted frequently since the last glacial period. However, the volcano has remained relatively peaceful for over a century until the winter of 2009.
December 2009.
Increased seismic activity is recorded in Iceland.
March 3rd to March 5th, 2010.
Close to 3,000 earthquakes are measured at the epicenter of the volcano.
March 20th, 2010.
Volcano begins erupting from the northeast flank where there is no ice, and the eruptions are relatively small. This marks the start of the first phase of eruptions.
April 14th, 2010.
After a brief period of time of inactivity, the volcano resumes erupting from the center of the ice cap, causing ash plumes. This marks the start of the second phase of eruptions. The melted water mixes with magma and results in the creation of glass particles, which are then carried up by the plumes upwards of 20,000 to 35,000 feet, roughly the same altitude of cruising airplanes. These particles can be very hazardous to planes, causing flight cancellations. The air traffic control company shuts down airspace over large parts of Europe.
April 17th, 2010.
Wind pushes ash clouds further south. Cancellation and closure of airspace remain in effect.
April 21st, 2010.
Most flights are given permission to resume flying, as ash particles are no longer found in high amounts in the air.
As we just witnessed over that fateful week of April 14th to the 21st, the volcanic eruptions proved to be catastrophic as they wreaked havoc over the skies of Europe. The destructive prowess of this volcano can be attributed to its location, which is directly under a jet stream. At the eruption's second phase, the jet stream was relatively stable, maintaining a southeasterly heading towards the rest of Europe. Furthermore, the meltwater from the glacier was also making its way into the volcano, and this created an unusual phenomenon. The rapid vaporization of the meltwater significantly increased the explosive power of the volcano. As a result, the volcano was able to inject ash into the jet stream above. So, it is obvious that this volcano did not only affect Iceland, but the rest of the world as well. To discuss its global impact, we have with us today our chief economic analyst, Shahim Abid. So Shahim, despite this volcano's isolation, it had a global impact. Is that correct?
Thanks, Ronik. That's correct. Well, first of all, we're very fortunate to not have any casualties associated with this volcano, and that's just due to the fact that it's found in such a remote location. However, like you said earlier, a lot of people were affected by this volcano and its consequences all over the globe.
So how about the people in Iceland? They must have been affected the most, right?
Surprisingly, no. The people of Iceland are very well prepared for volcanic eruptions, and that's just due to the fact that they have a lot of active volcanoes in the region and have faced eruptions in the past. Furthermore, the economy depends very heavily on the fishing industry and the export of machinery, and these two areas aren't really affected by volcanic eruptions like something such as agriculture. And furthermore, they don't really have big businesses or large infrastructure within the vicinity of the volcano.
So can you go a little more in depth about who was affected and how this affected the airline industry?
For sure. The airline industry is definitely the one that was hit the hardest. This is an industry that's coming off years of deficit, and they're losing money constantly, and this is just yet another big blow. Since no one really knew how to react to something like this, such as glass particles and volcanic ash being up 25,000, 35,000 feet in the air where planes are, the governing bodies made the decision, which some people scrutinize as being way too hasty, of closing airspace. When in the 1980s, we did know about two planes that suffered engine failure because of flying through in areas of high volcanic ash, so that justified the government decision in their eyes. However, the decision did end up very costly for the airline industry. There's like about every day 1.2 million people are affected, and altogether that means 10 million passengers were affected. And these people had to go to jobs, so they missed work, they had to be compensated. Imports and exports weren't getting through to the countries they had to. And lastly, the main figure is that the airline industry lost about $1.7 billion dollars altogether. And like I talk about imports and exports, because of this, not only Europe is affected, countries as far as Kenya and New Zealand, in two completely different continents, are also affected. For example, Kenya, they had to lay off about thousands of workers temporarily because they didn't have to harvest any crops because they just go bad since they're unable to export them. And the crops that were already harvested were sitting in warehouses and they rotted, they were a total loss. New Zealand faced similar problems as they rely on the fishing industry and exporting that material to Europe, but they're unable to do that, so they had the same problem as Kenya. And lastly, it's not just that Europe isn't able to import these materials, they're unable to export as well. For example, Great Britain, which is a world leader in pharmaceutical drugs export, they're unable to export that, so some of those are expiring, and the people that need to import them because of prescription, they're unable to get it, and people that are selling it are unable to sell it, so it impacts everyone. But like everything else, since these people are negatively affected, some people are actually positively affected. Since people still have to get from place to place in Europe, the industries such as train and ferries, they faced a significant increase in sales. And lastly, Iceland's very own tourism industry went up as people are just flocking to see this volcano. So it just proves the saying, one person's misfortune is another person's opportunity. That's all. Back to you, Ronik.
Thanks, Shaheem. Well, now we have a good understanding of the devastation of this eruption from a global perspective. We now go to our reporters live in Iceland who will explore the science behind this volcano as well as tell us how citizens are coping with the situation.